Train by day, Joe Rogan podcast by night, all day.
Let's talk about this. I did a tweet once where I said, I know my road is Vincent van Gogh. I'll probably die alone, unknown and penniless. But years after I'm gone, you guys are going to see all the work I did and say, holy shit, this autistic artist was a legend. Now, I don't know about the latter part, but I feel for Vincent van Gogh. You know, I feel like my ear was cut off, given all the love I had in my heart, and just trying to create artwork, autistic artwork. It started off with just autism. And then I felt like I needed to shape the autism into a form of communication that people could understand. And for the longest time, people couldn't understand it. And I knew that was my fault. At first, I put all of it onto them. You know, I blamed other people for not understanding the complexity of the situation. I told you everything. And I see a lot of other great artists out there make that same mistake. And I realized for all the work I felt I was doing, I wasn't doing enough work. Because it's not just about doing the research and putting it out there. It's about explaining it in simple enough terms that everyone can understand. Sometimes, however, even the simple explanation for how things work, and this was the case with the censorship industrial complex. Let me just complete this point by saying from 2017 until I want to say mid 2022, no one could even understand, even in simple terms, because the simple terms implied a world that folks did not believe, but even if they could believe, did not want to believe, and therefore wouldn't believe, even if they had an inkling it was there, was the world they lived in. They could not imagine, for example, that the Department of Homeland Security, which was set up to stop 9/11, might have a domestic censorship government office, despite our having a First Amendment. Well, if that thing exists, that implies that our entire Constitution is being destroyed. If the State Department can point inward, well, that implies that they wouldn't let that happen. It's too crazy to be true. And if it is true, I don't want to live in the world that we're in. And because it hasn't personally impacted me quite yet, maybe I can go back to watching Netflix and, I can, if I just keep ignoring the mail, then no one's come and shut off my water and power yet. So maybe I don't really owe my credit card company $120,000. Maybe I'm not really behind $250,000 on my student loan debt. I'll just stop checking the mail. And so what I found was necessary to do was, rather than presenting it all, I don't even know if this is correct, but my memory of the perspective gun in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy was that it's a gun that works by showing people how the enormous magnitude, the size of the universe. And by just seeing the size of the universe, people instantly feel how small and insignificant they are and keel over dead because of a sense of helplessness and existential dread that their life has no meaning. You can see that perspective gun effect happen when you tell people, that was how I felt when I tried to tell. I'm accidentally shooting someone with a perspective gun. So even if they see the receipt, even if they look at the internal planning guide, even if they see the list of everything that they've already said that they did. It's the perspective gun. Same thing with USAID, CIA, all of it, that in the universities and the unions and the American Bar Association. The point is, if you're too ahead of your time, people not only don't believe you, but you upset them. You make them upsetty spaghetti because you are presenting a vision of the world they don't want to see. And the negative emotions that they feel when they see that, they project onto you. And I know this goes away in time as the future draws near and as they get enough data points to see that the ways. And by the way, I do not want to blackpill anyone. Temporary blackpilling to me is a last resort. That video I just recorded earlier, that was a kind of last resort moment because I'm frustrated right now. And me just kind of gently putting out positive solutions has not generated the necessary momentum. We're too far behind schedule. But now taking this to the Joe Rogan episode, 2447, I knew, and I just don't like having me on screen with me talking for too long. So let me put on, let me find Joe in here somewhere. So I did not know what the topic was going to be for this. I was completely prepared a week before. Because this is the thing, the way he titles his episodes is it's not a topic. Joe doesn't advertise himself. It's a really cool thing. It's just the other person. You know, any other show in podcasts, let alone politics, it'll be this topic with this person. But there's no topic. You don't talk beforehand, strategize. It's just all off the cuff in the moment. Now, the whole week before, there had been the Minnesota uprising. That was the big thing for the 2 weeks or so. And I knew that, you know, that was a topic of interest. I heard Joe talk about with Andrew Wilson about the color revolution stuff. And so I had actually prepared. I can show you my notes on all this. It was I had prepared things coming into a couple days before on the with a whole kind of list of receipts, timestamps, all of that. But then a funny thing happened about 3 days before we recorded, which was these new Epstein files dropped. And 3.5 million files dropped. And there's no way even the entire internet can go through 3.5 million files in that short a time. And I thought, well, listen, this is a chance to present a kind of theory of understanding Epstein. You guys know I was on X all day, every day for those 3 days, pulling receipts that I found, some of them extremely compelling ones, making public calls for action, some of which you guys did, which is awesome. Like the FOIAs to the CIA. I had like a dozen people today said that they filed FOIAs at the CIA for the CIA's correspondence with Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer about Epstein's requested records about himself, which is unbelievably awesome. And I have another one for you guys that I just found, but I'll talk about that later. I also, so that was actionable, and I want to make sure to focus on the things like that and the story around the JFK Records Collection Act, because the other main call to action was for Congress to replicate the JFK Records Collection Act and just swap out the name, the letters JF, the name John F. Kennedy with the name Jeffrey Epstein. That way we could compel legally the Central Intelligence Agency to get the classified layer of the iceberg we can't presently see. So those were my two goals coming into this, which was that I wanted to make sure that the CIA was FOIA'd for its communications with Jeffrey Epstein. And I wanted to plant the seed because I know a lot of staffers in Congress follow me from a dozen different congressional subcommittees and probably 30 or 40 different congressmen and senators I know. I know many members of Congress and several members of the Senate who follow my work. And I know a huge amount of House of Representatives, congressmen, House members who follow my work. And I know even more of their legislative directors, their staffers do, which means there'll be bottom-up pressure within the office to be the hero, to simply sponsor this bill. And coming back to that, because this was a big focus in this thing we just did, is that the files that we have are only for DOJ, Justice Department originated files. That includes the FBI, because the FBI is the investigative arm of the Justice Department. That is why, unlike the JFK files that we see, remember how we went through the JFK files? Half of the documents were on CIA letterhead, and then there'd be the ancillary collection and enclosures related to those. You see no CIA letterhead on any of these documents, and the CIA is not allowed to just publish classified documents. They need to look for them and then put them through what is ordinarily a lengthy declassification process to even legally give them to us. But if they are legally compelled in the form of a duly passed by the House and Senate and approved beyond, approved by the president, and if necessary, in a veto-proof way, as the Epstein disclosure for the DOJ bill was, that will not only force the CIA to review it and force and allow an independent auditing board, an independent records review board to have access to it, but it will force a disclosure schedule to the extent that classified documents exist. So those are my main two goals. And we spent a lot of focus around those things. And one of them, I'm happy to report to you right now, the fire has started. We've started the fire. The FOIAs have now been sent. I have seen the screenshot receipts FOIA submitted, which means now there must be a response from the CIA legally to respond. And the longer they take to respond, the more they staffed the White House press pool with our guys, didn't they? They put, Jack Posobiec and Brianna Morel. They put all Benny Johnson. So they put so many of our people. Well, if a month, 2 months drags by, there's a CIA FOIA request sitting on the CIA's desk. What's the status of it? Now pressure can be mounted because there is something legally actionable. And yes, you have to delay legally actionable things. They delay legally actionable things sometimes. For example, with this release of 3.5 million documents, they delayed it. They blew past the deadline by a couple weeks. And this was a big source of scandal that the Democrats amplified and that folks like Thomas Massie, who sponsored the bill, would repeatedly point out. But they did ultimately comply. And we have now more hard, direct evidence than we've ever had in 7 years of this saga playing out and 40 years of Epstein's life. So I consider half of my mission for this accomplished. The other half, all it takes is one member of Congress. And to keep up the heat on this, as I intend to do, I believe it's very possible that that might happen. We'll see. Now, within that, let me say another thing. The first 2 Joe Rogan podcast hits I did were dynamite. And I knew they would be, and I came extremely prepared. What you saw in those first 2 appearances was not an accident. I prepared psychotically, monomaniacally, and it was a very, very focused blitz, one thing after another, one thing after another. Well, I had goals in mind in those, and everything was tailored to those goals. Also, they were topics that I think 100% of Joe's audience totally agrees with. Free speech online is something that, even I think the Democrats and center left, or even most left folks who tune into Joe Rogan, didn't know that thing existed, or if they did know it existed, they agreed. And so in some sense, it was not difficult to do in terms of knowing that I would get audience blowback, because this is something the audience supported 100%. And there's no division over it, unlike with Epstein. With Epstein, it is a highly divisive issue from 1,000 different directions. You have, for example, the President of the United States, who is in control of the entire executive branch, which means the Secretary of State, all the different White House offices, the Secretary of War, the Director of National Intelligence, the CIA Director, the FBI Director, the Attorney General of the United States. They all know there's heat on the Epstein issue. I presume. I don't talk to them. But there is a hierarchy in government. That's one side. There is also the fact that that the Epstein issue is perhaps ground zero of the MAGA civil war playing out right now around basically U.S. domestic focus and foreign policy that touches on Israel, as well as questions about the role of foreign lobbies in American politics, like issues around institutions representing primarily Israeli interests on U.S. domestic politics. And then within there, you have perhaps an even more schism than between Trump and the base. Then you have the pedo sort of angle of the Epstein looking glass. You've got the folks, which I would argue are most people coming into this files drop, who see the Jeffrey Epstein story as being primarily about a international child sex trafficking ring. And they're really passionate about that issue. And God bless them. It's a real issue. And with Epstein, some fraction of that is real with respect to the trafficking of several underage minors, at least. But so any single position you stake out on this, you are going to alienate 60% of a Joe Rogan audience. If you only focus on one particular angle of it, you are going to piss off, like if you say, if you say, like, you blame the Justice Department for not getting these files sooner, and this is like, it envelops Trump world. And that's why, like, you've just ignited the only people who can do something for you in terms of government action to get transparency. If you just talk about one aspect of Epstein's geographical network, you say it's all CIA, you're going to have people who say, oh, you're a shill for Mossad. If you say it's all Israel, people are going to say, oh, these conspiracy theories totally like look at everything else, like you're only like picking on this one thing. If you say it's a giant pedo ring, okay, well, I guess I wouldn't piss anybody off other than lose my credibility and self-respect, because it's just not true. And if I say the fact that the real story here is the finance side, it's financial fixer, money laundering, and I downplay the thing that this is what I'm accused of, right? This is not what I believe. If I shift the focus to what is actionable and real, as opposed to what is not actionable, and in my view, and I'm open-minded, but does not appear to be real in the organized, systematic way that you let yourself believe in the vacuum of a coherent explanation for this over 7 years, then I look like I'm covering up for a international child sex trafficking ring, right? So what I tried to do was try to give a synopsis of my understanding of what Epstein represents, of what you can learn about the world through these Epstein files and other in combination with everything else we've learned, in a way to see Epstein so that when you look at the Epstein files as they continue to play out on social media virality and videos and audio and documents and screenshots, you can put the future things that you read into that context. I thought about making like a top 10 best of things that dropped this week. And in retrospect, I kind of wish that I had done that, because if I had done that quickly and then kept the other things, I think I would have assuaged much of the public response to this video. And let's be real. If you look at the comment sections, for example, the first two videos, it was 100%. I had people messaging me. I've never seen like 100% audience support or whatever in the comment section. And I expected that this would not go the same way as those, because the honest truth of the matter here and the way you need to change your mind to understand it is going to piss off pretty much everyone on every side. And then there'll be some people who will get it, but most people, they won't get it. Do you know what I mean? And here I come back to Van Gogh. His paintings didn't have worth in his lifetime. People didn't get it. I started this stream by playing St. Pablo, the title track off of Kanye's St. Pablo album.
Say no. People trying to say I'm going crazy on Twitter.
I'm going crazy on Twitter.
And I can see 1,000 years from now in real life. Skate on a paradigm and shift it when I feel like.
Skate on a paradigm, shift it when I feel like. Listen, people had a paradigm of Epstein in mind because they did not know this other world exists. So they could only think of Epstein in terms of a world that they could credibly imagine. When Epstein was Epsteined in prison, and people saw the very real young female sex trafficking, and some of them minors. And you combine that with the Pizzagate stuff, and you combine that with all the other, crazy high-level, political operative pedo shit that played out over the past couple of years. They went, okay. They killed him to cover up that. They had no conception of the blob. They had no conception of the sticky layer that exists between government and business, between government and foundations, between foundations and business, of the complex tapestry of geopolitical interplay that exists between the US, Israel, Saudi Arabia, the UK, of how things are structured in covert action, that there's even the role of middlemen like Jeffrey Epstein. If the government of Israel, the government of the United States, or the government of France wants to do something somewhere, that wasn't even a concept that you could write a story about. You'd have to write a 10-volume encyclopedia and then have it taught in elementary school for most people to grow up and understand a story, an aspect of the Epstein that even touches on that thing. This was the task I felt it required. This is why I never published the book on weapons of mass deletion, because I realized 270 pages into it, realizing this thing would have to be 2,700 pages, that, like Ben Franklin said, the book by its very length defends itself against the risk of being read. I couldn't tell the story. In order to get people to take action on it, they had to A, know it was there, and then B, target solutions to every layer of that ecosystem, that complex, the government level, the university level, the foundation level, the platform level. And if you tried to tell people that, you're blaming Mark Zuckerberg, but really, you should be putting most of your blame on the Department of Defense, the Department of State, USAID, the National Endowment for Democracy, the Wilson Center, the Atlantic Council, the Carnegie Endowment, the Central Intelligence Agency. What I would hear is what I'm hearing now in response to this video, which is you're deflecting. Why are you covering for Mark Zuckerberg? You're a shill for Mark Zuckerberg. I remember, I think it was my second stream when I started this account in 2022, after being a ghost. And I remember I had about 5,000 followers, and I participated in a stream. And I thought it was a masterpiece. It was a 9-hour stream. I think I spoke for 7 hours on it. It wasn't even a stream. It was an X Space. I think Barry Raz was hosting it. And it was like just 7 hours of me just going through all this shit. And I'm like, yeah, people are going to get this. This is chunkable. This is clippable. And I remember, this is still December 2022, maybe in January 2023. I remember the next day looking for to see if people were getting it. Do you get it? Do you get my concept album? And the reaction was, Benz is a shill for the CIA. He's covering for the CIA. He's downplaying. He's whitewashing the CIA's crimes. And I went, see, I don't have this reaction anymore. At least I didn't have it this time. But at the time, that shocked me. I thought to myself, holy crap. I thought I spent nothing but 7 hours crapping all over the CIA. And I've got 100 accounts and only like 5,000 follow me. So that's like a lot when you see that. who are saying, oh, this new guy on the scene works for the CIA. He's a CIA shill. He's what? I'm going to go. This was the most savage treatise on the Central Intelligence Agency I think the internet may have ever heard. How can they think that? And I thought, well, they do think that, so they must. So let me try to empathetically retard myself. And what I realized is it's because along the way of explaining how the CIA played a central role, both directly and indirectly, in the censorship industrial complex, I had to take very long passages of time to speak plainly, neutrally about what the rationale of the CIA was in doing so, and how many good faith actors in our intelligence community could have gone along for the ride. So explaining the concept of national interest and national security and, hostile foreign influence operations and the mandate to do covert influence, to influence the flow of information and speech, and how this was done during the Cold War, leaving us with the apparatus we have now. There's another thing. I was also accused of, being a communist because I had to explain the origins of this. And what I realized is that when people have a paradigm about something,
Worry about me, I'm fine. I can see 1,000 years from now in real life. Skate on a paradigm and shift it when I feel like.
when people have a paradigm and they're really bought into it, a strong belief, not even a strong belief, strongly held. It can be a belief they can change 2 weeks or a month from now. Not something they actually believe at the factual or soul level, but something that they believe in the limbic system in their brain. To simply sit with the perspective that explains something neutral about the other side, about the other side of the thing that is, the enemy, the demon. Just to sit and listen to a neutral description of it appears to be an endorsement of those evils and kind of forces the audience, if they want to continue listening, to sit with the discomfort of the conflict between the evil demon they see the thing is and the demon's eye view. And what the irony here is with the Epstein thing is, I think when you see it through the lens that I'm describing it, it's arguably even more demonic. It's not even arguably, it is, in my view, way more scandalous. Because it's not just something that affected like several hundred vulnerable women or something. It's something that literally affects like everybody on planet Earth. You look at this Lord Mandelson scandal that's playing out right now, where, the finance minister is giving inside knowledge, inside baseball on the European bailout. Well, your life is affected by that bailout. If you are in Europe, your life is affected by the bailout of the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Your life is affected by the back channel deals. Your life is affected by the universities that he funds. And it's not just you were affected in the past. This is the ecosystem that is more or less untouched with Jeffrey Epstein's death. You can argue that if Epstein was, Epstein in prison, well, thank God the pedo ring's closed. This thing that I'm describing, the financial fixer, the financial logistics, the financial facilitator for everything from intelligence agencies to multinational corporations to private equity funds to hedge funds to foundations to major global governments. That is pretty much untouched, but it can be touched if you know what to look for and understand that this kind of thing is kind of the demon you were looking for when your gut instinct said, holy shit, this guy's evil and he's stinky. Does that make sense? So let me get into some more specifics here or whatever. Those were pretty much the four categories of things that I anticipated would be the push. And this is another thing. Look, I'm learning as I go. I'm totally new to this. I'm extremely grateful that you guys and the other folks who, have followed and amplified my work allowed my messages to spread so quickly and allowed me to go from 0 to, whatever million in such a short period of time. I mean, 3 years is a short period of time. It seems a lot shorter to the internet than it does to me, because it's not that much if you think of it as 10 years instead of 3 years. But it is fast in 3 years. It's very fast in 3 years. But, I come back to Bob Dylan, "A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall." I knew my song well before I started singing. If I had started publishing on social media about this when I was first starting, I would have made a lot of mistakes. And that would have crushed my credibility. And that would have, and smart people and people with high follower counts who can amplify your stuff, you get a reputation for being wrong. Even if you're wrong some of the time, you get a reputation for not being solid. And they don't know whether to retweet something because they saw you were wrong before. And so in a way, it's a blessing that I could work this all out privately, both in my own prison of private research and in my own private briefings with people inside and outside of government. In a weird way, it's like that painful period was a gift rather than a curse. But I'm new to this, is kind of the fundamental point I'm getting at. And I think if the focus of this conversation had been about like the Minnesota uprising and all of that, it would have been a bombshell just like the first one. But it was Epstein. And because this is a complicated issue where I'm having to shift a paradigm, because that's what I feel like, not what the primal id of the collective internet has as their current paradigm. Although I'm pretty confident that in time that will evolve. Because, truth has a funny way of catching up, though it definitely takes its time. If there's any validation of that, by the way, I didn't start my Twitter account before it was X. I didn't start a Twitter account until December 2022. And you can see that right here. You see this? I started this in December 2022. So while I had 0 followers, 0, a ghost, 7 months before that, May 22, I authored this op-ed, "The Twitter censorship fight has just begun," where I called everything in advance that would happen, and I made special attention at the end to talk about the thing that once again It was the top trending news in the country yesterday and was the focus of both how we started the stream and how we're going to, and what our main event will be. I wrote this. Inevitably, the censorship industry, and I prefer to call it the censorship industry, because the censorship industrial complex is a cute turn of phrase. By the way, it's hard to write in a book a million times. It's just very polysyllabic. But the heart of the censorship industrial complex is the industrial part of it. It's the fact that it's a business. People aren't volunteer professional censors. They've got, wives to make happy and kids to feed and mortgages to pay off. These are professionals, which means they need to make money, which means the money is the heart of what keeps it going. And it's the thing to target to take it down. I wrote, Trump may be immunized against such civil society encirclement tactics that I described above. At $300 billion net worth, a triple-digit billionaire may not break under the same commercial pressures put on mere millionaires or low-digit billionaires. So I said, inevitably, the censorship industry will promote rule of law pretexts to force Musk to crush a free speech Twitter. When this happens, it will not be a novel occurrence. History will have merely retweeted itself. Now understand, that is what is happening in Europe. The EU Digital Censorship Act, keyword act, it's a law. It is a rule of law pretext. If we can't crush you through killing your advertising revenue, if we can't crush you by smearing you in the press and driving users off your platform, if we can't, crush you in like a civil lawsuit, then we will literally pass a law, and no one's above the law, that will make it illegal or impossible for you to host the speech we don't like. And what I said is it's going to come from Europe, as you are seeing play out before your eyes in 4K HD. This is when I had 0 followers, guys. 7 months before I even had 1 follower. There's a little-known secret history of how the first great wave of internet censorship began in 2017. It didn't start with tech companies themselves. Veteran diplomats from the State Department, expecting promotions after Hillary Clinton won the 2016 presidential election, were unceremoniously fired when Donald Trump won instead, so they were out of a job. Trump's victory was blamed on the free and open internet, capitalizing on EU partners' fears that 2016's Brexit vote would lead to France and Frexit. Oh, that's weird. France. What just happened in France yesterday? Brexit and Greece were the same things happening. It'll exit in Italy. These powerful diplomats took their influence across the Atlantic. There, they pressured European regulators to pass novel internet censorship laws, such as Germany's 2017 NetzDG, knowing tech companies in the U.S. will be forced to apply similar censorship measures at home to preserve continuity with their global markets. A second EU to U.S. censorship pipeline has already been established. Last week, both President Obama and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton heralded the new EU Digital Censorship Act as a tool for cracking down on different opinions online. Can Elon Musk truly take on a transatlantic flank attack? Deus ex machina, I want to write, may need a Deus ex machina himself to aid in the conflict ahead. Now, this thing was limited to 800 words, so I want to say a lot more than just that op-ed, but believe you me, I was not quiet behind that. At the time, I don't think anyone knew what the fuck that meant, other than a couple of private diehards, who had been helping me and helping to, get me to meet people over the years. And in 2022, this is 7 months before the Twitter files. And 7 months before I had an account. Blaming things on Europe. You're taking the heat off Biden. Blaming things on Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and saying they conspire with Europe. You're giving cover. You're saying the censorship isn't Biden's fault, and you're saying it's not Mark Zuckerberg's fault. Are you an infiltrating agent? Are you an intelligence agent for the European Union? Let me see your passport. Do you secretly work for Facebook? And look, I get it. If I retard myself, I get it. I can see through your eyes. But I saw into the future. And it's not me being smart. That's just me being consistently in this world every day, every night, in the fucking... I don't shower without having something playing from my stereo where I'm learning about this stuff. I don't take a shit without having my phone reading about this stuff. I don't ride an airplane. I don't ride a train. I don't fall asleep. I fall asleep with this stuff in my ear. It is painful for me to be away from it. If I take a day off, I feel like I haven't brushed my teeth in 3 months. And I don't want the enemy to be some giant transatlantic thing that's so fucking difficult to take on in a coordinated, triangulated, narrowly tailored solutions for each one way. I wish it was that easy. I wish it was that easy that I could say, 150% tariffs. Yep. Yeah, you just you fire the director of the National Science Foundation. Just like I wish it was that easy, and I bet they wish it was that easy to win an election by having a good message. No campaign, no ad spend. What did you raise $1.3 billion for? Didn't you know the answer was easy? The voters want to hear that you're going to do something about immigration. The role of true evil as the forces of these social control moves is the way to go. Linda, thank you so much for the support. Let me explain why, even though I know it's evil, I believe it to be evil, that I don't use those terms in public messaging, even on the Joe Rogan show where I know it would play to the audience. And that is because we're to describe it as evil, even though it is, and I'm totally happy if you guys do that, is to be blissfully ignorant. It's almost to let the system off the hook. Because you need to see how people get involved in this machine. And the very non-evil first steps that people take as inroads into this, and the very non-evil justifications people can tell themselves for getting, you know how they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions? Well, you need to understand the good intentions side or the neutral intentions side to even understand that road to hell, if you want to reform it. Otherwise, you will be just another person pointing and sputtering at the evil. And you will encourage the people who listen to you to point and sputter instead of doing something real and actionable and concrete. Take, for example, the National Science Foundation, which was the worst, the most damage to your ability to speak online from 2018 to 2024 was not the CIA. Was not, well, I mean, not directly the CIA, not directly the State Department, not directly USAID, not directly the one that did the most damage to you was the National Science Foundation. They were the ones who funded directly way more in dollar grants to American censorship organizations and universities and flaggers and all that that directly impacted your speech in America, it was than any other single agency. Now, it was not the origination of it. The National Science Foundation is the civilian arm of DARPA. DARPA is the brain of the military. It was the military intelligence diplomatic blob that came up with this. And then the National Science Foundation was the most direct funder. But the point is what I crafted for the National Science Foundation was on the basis of that. If I had said the National Science Foundation is evil, and they were for 6 years, arguably the most directly evil of our government agencies, weirdly enough, I don't know that we've got the pull to shut down the National Science Foundation. You might have domestic riots on them. I mean, the entire university school system goes down there. But because I knew what the topography of it was, I was able to propose to the Trump administration a narrowly tailored but highly effective solution that killed the funding to every university censorship center in America, closing many of them down and forcing the ones to remain to shift into a different line of work. And by the way, guys, feel free to disagree with me. I ain't mad at you. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe I'm wrong about, I don't think I am. But and I will make my case, but I will listen to you as you make yours, and I'll take your points into consideration. As I said on the Rogan thing, I'm open to it. If someone can find me a lead, let alone a smoking gun, just a simple lead that's actionable that you can pursue in any of these files. And I have seen some vague leads in some of these files on that. I don't see people talking about following up on them, but it's still early in the process. I'm willing to make room in my head that the truth falls somewhere between what I currently believe and what most of the internet circa this moment believes. It's hard for me to believe it's what, the current paradigm majority is, but I could come closer to where that is if there's evidence. But it's your job to present that evidence. I've presented evidence this way. But the point is my messaging. Did you ever hear me say like the National Science Foundation is evil? And to even imagine what it's like, death penalty, they're going to die in hell. They're going to, there are a lot of people whose support I need to kill these grants that love the National Science Foundation. How do I talk to them? Well, it's the same thing with the Epstein network. He was friends with a lot of people. For a time, he was friends with Donald Trump, Howard Lutnick. Their communications with Elon. There's communications with like everybody. And if you say, even though Epstein himself, evil, if your focus is everything about this, everything is so transparently evil that to even have a conversation, to even have a historical business deal, any of that is literally Satan. That makes literally everybody that you like or that has saved your fucking ass selflessly or has saved our country evil. Now, that doesn't mean you can't still call them evil and believe they're evil. But I'm not content to point and sputter and just say something's evil. I want action taken. I want a law that compels the CIA to review and declassify all of its JFK. I want the CIA FOIA. I want disclosures for, and I mean, do you know what I'm saying here? I hated I can't tell you. The reason I exist is because everybody else in 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, everybody else was content to say Mark Zuckerberg's evil. Susan Wojcicki is evil. Jack Dorsey is evil. And by making that the extent of the effort you put into this, it's actually you who are covering for the evil. You are letting the U.S. military off the hook. You're letting the intelligence services off the hook. You're letting the diplomats off the hook. You're letting the universities off the hook. You're letting the NGOs off the hook. You're letting the rapid response units off the hook. You're using the machine learning, natural language processing, AI, sensor tech developers off the hook. Yes, they don't perceive themselves that way. Well, this is the other thing. I think that the crux of the seed that I wanted to plant, the paradigm, if you will, that I was trying to shift the 20 million strong Rogan audience towards, came about in this segment. Well, yes, they don't perceive themselves that way. And the support system, you have to get to the justifications. And then you have to go after those. But you need to articulate and understand the justifications before you even know what to go after. This is the point that I made about reconstruction of our foreign policy apparatus in the wake of the shutdown of USAID. It was that, yes, this heart has serious heart disease and it needs open heart surgery. You got that part right. You have authorized the open heart surgery. But to do the surgery without killing the patient on the operating table, you need to understand the anatomy of the thing you are operating on, or else the patient will die on the operating table. So you need to understand the anatomy of it, which means if you want to be a doctor, even though you hate heart disease, you have to, let's just say heart disease is the devil. It's the number one cause of death worldwide. I fucking hate heart disease. It is evil incarnate. Well, you want to be a doctor, a heart doctor. You want to be a cardiologist, right? We're going to need to read a textbook about how the heart works. And if you sit there fuming, stewing, this book on the anatomy of the heart, it's neutral in tone. It's talking about, different chambers of the heart. It's talking about how the aorta, works with, it's talking about the circulatory system and, all the different dynamics of red blood cells. Like, what are you doing? You're taking the focus off how evil the heart is. You're justifying how the heart works. You're justifying how heart disease, you're justifying heart disease killing people because you're talking about heart disease like you're telling me about the heart. I just want to end heart disease. And then you only read 15 minutes of an 800-page medical textbook because the mental pain of having to read about the heart works when you just want to stop heart disease. 50 from Pakela. You won't die unknown. It's too late for that. You won't die alone. That you have thousands of friends who would walk all over broken glass. No, thanks, Sam. Listen, it's more that I want to see this vision through to the best of my ability. That's all. Whatever happens, happens. I think if I get, this is a funny detour, but probably watch that Charlie Kirk video 100 times just in the 48 hours. I just kept replaying it. And beyond the gore and the shock of it, I remember being surprised, kind of in awe that, I'm probably not the first person on the internet, who, when Live Leak came around, saw freak videos of people dying in freak ways. There's a look on most people's face like, oh, I can't believe this is happening. Oh, why is this happening? I have so much left to live. And there's this like fear and terror. And when I saw the way Charlie left this earth, it was, I don't know how else to say this besides he took it like a man, in a way that I hope, if something like that happens to me, is the way I take. It did not look like there was that ever even a flicker of the moment in the eye that, oh, don't take me yet because I haven't given my all. You know that thing when you feel kind of guilty that you didn't prepare enough, there was more you could have done. I felt like even in the millisecond moments of that tragedy, there was a kind of pride in the life that he lived, that he knew that he gave everything he could and used his abilities to the maximum extent, and that he was pure. And when he surely knew that he was going to move on to the next life, that there was something in him that made him think, well, this is the fate God has selected for me. And I'm proud to meet my maker, that I have given it all I've got. Whatever the next light I see, whatever angel I talk to next, I can tell them I left nothing on the table. And that to me is kind of, whether it's being alone forever, whether it's a freak accident or whatever, that's how I want to be free. I feel like I missed no, okay, we're good. All right, so the crux of the Rogan interview, in my view, and I think this is the moment that it kind of sidebarred, and I'll tell you what I would have done, because look, what I said to a family member after this was, I just dropped graduation and homecoming, and the people wanted graduation and homecoming, and I gave them St. Pablo. I gave them a concept album when they wanted like they wanted top 40 hit. And I heard that St. Pablo was like, not as well critically reviewed when it came out. When I first listened to St. Pablo, the Kanye album, I didn't like it at first. And then when I moved out to LA, some of you guys were there with me on that. And, I first started this account and I moved out to LA. St. Pablo was like all I listened to. I mean, I think you can even probably, it took me a while to understand like what the artist was even going for, if that makes sense. And, but we'll see. All right. So the thing that I was looking for was this moment that I want to replay. Now, that being said, if I could do it again, there are a couple things I would have changed, and I'm going to tell you what those are. This is also kind of a different thing for me. I also tried to just not over prep, if that makes sense. But, and I do kind of regret that a little bit, because if I had done more, I would have definitely remembered to not leave before slipping in the things I'm about to tell you. Okay, let's see. It's Joe Rogan million. Let's try this. Okay. I'm going to let this play and then I'll do my commentary while I get my pizza.
It's so tangled. The whole thing is just, I think everybody who looks at it realizes this is a rabbit hole that just goes to the center of the earth. And there's so many people involved in that. Here's the big question that people ask. If there was a Jeffrey Epstein, and it seems like all these things he was involved in, is there a Jeffrey Epstein right now that we don't know about?
There's a million of them.
A million of them.
I mean, this is why I find this. This is not the core of what I focus on, but I find it a really interesting field of study because it helps understand so many other U.S. government institutions and the relationship between government and private business. Jeffrey Epstein is part of a class of what are effectively professional fixers. And this is a kind of class of professional who sits not really within a particular government or private sector institution, but in the kind of sticky layer between them that connects them all.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to...
Today, there are no doubters when I said that about the censorship industrial complex. 7 years ago, there were no believers. Think about that. When I talked about how the censorship industrial complex is mostly comprised of this kind of sticky layer in between the governments and the private sector, that civil society layer, they're in between an intelligence, a pure intelligence, and a pure not intelligence institution. They don't work for the CIA. They work downstream of a unannounced, covert soft power initiative to control the flow of information online. They don't work for the State Department. They work for a nonprofit entity that's got a government grant. What is it? Is it really a non-governmental institution if it's funded by the government? It's not a government agency. But is it really non-governmental, or is it a sticky layer in between? And if this sticky layer in between is the main layer of operations, financing, logistics for the censorship industrial complex, then that's actually the layer to target if you want to reform the system, if you want to win back your free speech online. If you shut down USAID, but the Stanford Internet Observatory is still getting $2.5 million, $2.x million in government grants from a government agency, if you target the government layer, but you don't target the sticky layer in between, you've changed something. You've changed some of the power of that government to utilize for that sticky layer to represent. But the first part is showing people that the sticky layer exists. If you look at a brick wall and you don't see that, there's mortar in between bricks, and then without that mortar, the wall comes tumbling down. Well, you don't even know where to drill into in the brick wall. And you're going to be literally running your head into a wall trying to attack it at the brick layer. And I want to give an analogy here when I say there's a million Epsteins. And here I wish I had, it's hard. I mean, This is like a free-flowing conversation, biggest podcast in the world. You got the Zach Galifianakis math equations going through your head when you're, doing about this, doing this. It's going to be recorded in history forever. At some point, you got to just like go with what first comes to mind. But I'll give you an example of, I wish I had said this, right? L'esprit de l'escalier, right? The spirit of the stairwell. That was that French expression. The predicament of thinking of the perfect reply too late. Someone says something to you and then you're halfway down the stairwell when you think of what you should have said. You guys remember this guy? I know you do. Eric Ciaramella was a mid-level CIA guy. I forget if he was an analyst. Let's see, was he? Let's see. Is he on Wikipedia? 12 years, analyst. Political analyst at CIA for 12 years. So he's a mid-level CIA guy. Let me get my numbers right. How much does a mid-level CIA political analyst make? Follow me. You make between $90,000 and $130,000 a year as a mid-level political analyst. Y'all see this? Let me bring this in so you can see it. Benz, I thought we were talking about Epstein. What are you talking about? The 2019 Ukraine impeachment, CIA? Oh, we're going somewhere with this. You got to let me cook. Now, this guy making between $90,000 and $130,000 a year. Now, when you work for the government like this, you can't make outside income. So Eric Ciaramella goes from making 90 to 130. Let's call it 110. Okay. We'll be generous. We'll call it 120. He's at CIA in 2019. Now, Eric Ciaramella is a real son of a bitch. He's the one who basically, memory serves me right, he was effectively like the leaker of the Trump 2019 perfectly fine phone call with Zelensky over Ukraine. And there was a mass censorship campaign. You could not post his name on Twitter. You could not type out his name in a Facebook Messenger chat. It was Voldemort. They wanted to make it a criminal penalty in Congress. They were talking about anybody who says this, the name of the whistleblower. Eventually came out that name was Eric Ciaramella. Well, Eric Ciaramella was fired, I believe, terminated. I don't think he left on his own. Let's see. Was he fired? Jeez, is it a fucking classified whether he still has a job? Okay. So maybe he had whistleblower support. But the point is this. You're a mid-level CIA analyst. You listen to this Trump phone call that you have access to. And you go, I could leak this. And some people would owe me favors. If I leak this and cause an impeachment scandal, a lot of people would owe me favors. A lot of people on the outside. For example, the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace would owe me favors because Bill Burns is running it, the CIA director. And the Carnegie Endowment pays $280,000 for a senior fellowship. And you can do whatever you want with no ethics constraints as an additional business. So if I leak this and a fixer can set me up in advance with a senior fellowship with the Carnegie Endowment, then, hey, I don't care if I get fired. I'll make more money with the people who owe me favors knowing I'm going to do this. How much is salary? of senior fellow at Carnegie Endowment. 230, 240, so twice the salary, potentially a lot more. Twice the salary if a fixer can arrange to convert the favors that I will be doing someone with doing this. Between 230 and 240. Between 90 and 130 to 230 and 245. So it's actually, you are incentivized to basically be a trader as long as some fixer can hook you up with a job on the outside. And I believe he's also probably drawing a salary from Harvard, lawfare. The point is let me give you an example that I ran into. When I ran the International Communications and Information Technology Bureau of the United States State Department, I ran 3 divisions. They all reported up to me. I was the political, everybody else was careers. And there was a bilateral, there was a multilateral, and there was a private sector engagement group. And they're all careers, which means that they can only be fired for cause. And there's a very long, arduous appeals and review process. You know, they're basically a union. Hard, but not impossible to fire. You can kind of hurt their career advancement. They don't want to piss off the politicals because there's the political appointees and then there's the careers who serve regardless of who's president. The careers vastly outnumber the politicals. I remember one day, the Atlantic Council was the real focus of my book in that point in 2020 because it connected everything. It connected NATO, it connected the National Endowment for Democracy, it connected USAID, it connected the State Department, it connected the CIA, and it connected all the different global governments participating in France, Germany, Spain, UK, Brazil, everything. It was very clean. 7 CIA directors on the board, annual funding from 11 different government agencies, and the worst in the business in the censorship industrial complex with their digital forensics research lab, the first player in the game, the first mortar that connected a brick in the censorship industrial complex. So imagine my shock. Now I'm a DAS, Deputy Assistant Secretary. So there's Secretary, Undersecretary, Assistant Secretary, Deputy Assistant Secretary. And so it's a couple layers down. You know, I'm three rings removed from the Secretary of State, but it's the DAS layer is where things are executed. You know, so I think there were 7 DASs, called the 7 Dragons. That doesn't mean that you don't have the most power by any stretch. Your boss, your boss's boss, and your boss's boss's boss can overrule you. But they would have to overrule you, which would mean they would need to know what you're doing because you've told them honestly what you're doing. And then, you know, have the argument or conflict. And if you are, for example, if the Secretary of State likes you or the Undersecretary, maybe your boss doesn't want to say no to you because of office politics. Just trying to flesh this out. Now, the point that I'm getting at here is coming back to this. One day, now as a DAS, I was talking about how like they're the workhorses. Okay, it's the lowest level of senior management, if that makes sense. So because of that, it's the only direct oversight of the bureaus in each of the different things. And I was in the cyber, right? I was economic affairs cyber. There's 7 DASs in the economic affairs, right? So like the assistant secretary has all the different DAS things under hers, and she just oversees those 7 people, basically. The DASs will oversee hundreds. Now, that means you're kind of at the crux of the point of fuckery, of the fixers, of the Epstein types. Maybe it's best, and as I'm explaining this to you guys, I'm remembering why I regretted not starting with this before. If I could do it all again, I would 100% have started before explaining Bruce Rappaport, before explaining how there are many other fixers, just like Jeffrey Epstein. I was trying to build towards a point I never got to. And the reason I never got to it is because I saw that Joe just, was really heavy. And I think he was kind of saturated by the end. And when he asked, okay, is there anything else you want to cover? I laughed because I thought, like, we haven't even scratched the surface, but I can tell that, this topic is kind of heavy. It seemed like, I don't know, I was just reading the room. Maybe I read it wrong, but the night before, now I posted this, we recorded at 1 p.m. At 4 a.m. the night before, I posted this video. I woke up as at 5.7 million views. So I figured this thing was already going viral. And Joe and I talked about it before we started recording. So, I kind of figured because it's going viral right now and everybody will have already seen it and Joe's already heard about it. I made the mistake of not talking about it because I'd kind of in my head presupposed everybody would have seen it and I'd be talking about stuff they already knew. But I regret doing that because an X audience is very different than a general YouTube, Spotify audience. And 6 million is very different than a 20 million Spotify audience. And the 6 million is just impressions, not even, views. I'm sure the completion rate is very low because it's a 10-minute video. So I think I fucked up tactically in not anchoring this whole thing in this. Now, as you guys probably saw, okay, I'll just read this. I'm utterly blown away by this new audio file in the Epstein files. It shows the secret conversation you fear every high-level government official might have with an outside fixer to hook them up the moment they leave government to enter the private sector. Here, Jeffrey Epstein teaches Ehud Barak, while he is still the Minister of Defense in Israel, but on his way out, how to make millions of dollars in the private sector by compiling a list who owe him favors, IOUs, from his years in government. I'm going to play this clip now.
He thought you should make a list of his work, was mentoring. He said, yes, but who has IOUs to you? Is that out of the people in the past who you think you're close to? He said that he really wanted you to make this list of this person owes me a favor, this person owes me his life, this person owes me his job.
So what you're hearing him say,
this person owes me a favor, this person owes me his life, this person owes me a job. This is what you are competing against as any, whether you're at State Department, whether you're at CIA, whether you're at Department of War, whether you're at USAID. To go in there, you have to give up your ability to make outside income. You have to, take a huge pay cut. Like, think about Dan Bongino, like 5 million down to like 200K because he decided to become a political appointee to run these bureaucrats. The bureaucrats are running the same Zach Galifianakis calculations in their head. They, every day, need to make a choice about whether to do what their boss, the political appointee, says, or whether to screw over the boss and put a favor in the favor bank that some outside fixer can arrange to get them a much better job, much more money when they leave their career service in government to enter the private sector. The incentive to serve your country is what I'm telling you about, is inverted. If you are a career, and again, FBI, there's 4 politicals, 38,000 careers. And every important government agency is this way. The reason that you have this vast bloated bureaucracy with a mind of its own, that, no matter who you vote for, it doesn't seem to change it, is not because they're all assholes, not because they're all evil. Million people work for the federal government. They're all evil. 2 million, whatever it is. If you include indirectly. Good people can make evil decisions by justifying things to themselves and having every financial incentive to do the wrong thing. You have a family, you're not thinking about yourself as much. You're thinking about your wife and your kids. And you begin to justify that, if I did this, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe something you didn't want to do before because you thought it was immoral. You think about how good it would be for your kids and your wife. And and then you get in a fight with your wife and you feel like a loser. You're not being a provider. And you go, well, listen, isn't being a good father, isn't being a good husband, isn't being a bad father and a bad husband a bigger evil than, promoting a sanctions policy against Ukraine if they don't want transgender textbooks? This is what I'm describing to you. Let me tell you this thing, okay? I, as a DAS at State, one day got a piece of inbound from the Atlantic Council. Now, mind you, at this point, I'm the only person in the State Department who doesn't like the Atlantic Council. They're a darling. Everybody gets their inbound. And as a DAS, even though Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Cyber Division, I did not, Ukraine was not my beat. That's EUR, that's the Europe and Eurasia desk. But because you get peripheral traffic to stay informed of everything State is doing, or policy recommendations, because, Ukraine's obviously a significant part of, world affairs, you get this inbound. Everyone at the level does. And what it said was our policy recommendations for the U.S. State Department in response to the Ukrainian parliament's imminent vote on a bill to regain powers in its Ministry of Education over Ukrainian public schools and education institutions. And I'll flesh that out in a sec. And it then describes in the body of the text and encloses a policy paper a proposal for the U.S. State Department in conjunction with the U.S. Treasury Department to freeze Ukraine's sovereign assets, the funds held basically in escrow that are owned by the Ukrainian government, but held in, I don't know if it's New York or Atlanta, Federal Reserve Bank, because we had a pool of money that we allocated to Ukraine, but it was held in a United States bank pending their achievement of milestones of democratic reforms. So it's their money, but we're holding on to it just until you fulfill, the things you promised us you'd do when we helped you overthrow the government in 2014. And I'm reading this. I didn't even know that there was this imminent Ukraine parliamentary vote. My memory on this is a little bit hazy. It was approximately this. And effectively what was happening is you had this right wing, at the time the left was calling it a far right government, the right sector majority, who was upset that LGBT textbooks were turning their kids gay or trans or whatever it is. Now, regardless of how you feel about that issue, the Atlantic Council, my memory serves me correct, it was something to this effect, was proposing that we literally threaten them in advance, poison pill, if their parliament passed this bill, because they used to have control of their own textbooks, Ukraine, but then as part of the post-2014 coup agreements with the United States around, aid, they agreed to relinquish sovereign control of their Ministry of Education and to instead have turn it over to an outside independent credentialing body. And it was a Euro-Atlantic, board of like NGOs and type, right? I mean, it was so that, if you remember our Ukraine Red Lines memo, so that basically the State Department, CIA, UK Foreign Office, MI6, and NATO Brussels could control the hearts and minds of Ukraine to keep them in their orbit and to stop textbooks teaching Russian mythology from being glorified in Ukrainian minds so that they'd be more supportive of the war effort. So I'm like, wait a second. You're telling us that if we, Atlantic Council, you want the careers and, the 300 careers and the political in the EUR desk to rob, just fucking gun to the head, rob the government of Ukraine unless they continue transing their kids. Well, now walk down the hallway, go to the Europe and Eurasia desk. What do you think goes through the mind of a mid-level career, or even a high-level career, or a low senior-level political appointee at that desk? They have a choice. Well, this has been strongly recommended by a prestigious outside think tank that I want to work at next. If I do a favor for them, I put a favor in the favor bank, I've just accrued an IOU. I can convert that favor into a job. The Atlantic Council also hosts events. Lots and lots and lots of events. And you go to these events. And, you network, you schmooze, you talk to people. And you talk to fixers. People say, oh, you're at the State Department. Oh, that's great. Have you ever thought about joining the think tank world? Have you ever thought about what you're going to do after? Oh, we'd love to have you. Yeah, the Carnegie Endowment is looking for actually a new non-resident senior fellow in our Europe and Eurasian office. In fact, if you go to Eric Sierra Mella, what is he a senior fellow in? He's a senior fellow and Ukraine Initiative Director of the Russia and Eurasia program. That's the same desk that Atlantic Council piece is directing its policy towards. So now everyone in the State Department who is sick of making $110,000 a year, at the next Carnegie Endowment event, at the next Atlantic Council event, at the next Brookings Institution event, they're talking about Ukraine policy. Someone says, hey, we sent this policy paper about, transing Ukrainian kids. They don't say it like that. They say ensuring the democratic transition so that democratic institutions like Ukraine's education institutions continue their transition toward democracy. You talk about, oh, yeah, well, don't know how the office is feeling. Well, this fixer class, this is this is who you're up. If you want the Europe and Eurasia office of the State Department to set U.S. policy, to fight transing kids, you can blame the senior, the mid-level bureaucrats who are going to push this, and whatever schizophrenically incentivized low-level political running that desk. You can blame them for not sacrificing their own self-interest. Their self-interest. The Epstein people, the Epstein class makes it in your self-interest to do wrong. Do you understand what I mean by that? The Epstein financial fixer class. If you do a favor for me, I'll do a favor for you. Makes it so that in order to put our country first, in order to do the right thing for humanity, you have to betray your own self-interest. Financially, as a career path, you have to defend that decision to your wife or kids. Babe, I promised you this was going to pay off one day. Well, didn't you mention that the Carnegie people said that they wanted to have you? Sex embargo because whatever. Everyone's got their own ambitions. And the Jeffrey Epstein class of people brings investors into these deals. It brings people into this. You might not want, for example, to support Saddam Hussein's construction of an oil pipeline. Maybe he's killing hundreds of thousands of people. And the deal doesn't even make sense to do. But Jeffrey Epstein is your gateway. The Rothschild Fund has $160 billion of assets under management. You want access to that pipeline of money. Jeffrey Epstein's throws the coolest parties and has the hottest girls at the party. And, you want access to that. Jeffrey Epstein did a big favor for you before when he helped you get this job. If you want another favor or something else he pitched you, you don't want to say no. And if you do say no, you start resenting good people. Maybe you fight this off for a while. You're a low-level political appointee or you're a senior career at state. You say, man, that's kind of messed up. I read between the lines. I see what you're saying. You're saying you want us to put sanctions on Ukraine, steal their money if they don't trans their kids. And they say, no, it's not like that. We're doing this because, in addition to things like that, they also could put Russian, propaganda in their textbooks. If we don't have the ability to control it, or the ability to have outside NGOs control it, well, then it's exactly what Russia wants. And you're like, that's bullshit. But then, you disagree with your boss, the political appointee, on something else, and you go, it's a lot of money if I backstab this guy, and he's kind of a son of a bitch. And I guess technically it's not all about the transing kids. It's they really could put Russian propaganda in there. You start playing games with yourself because this temptation exists. This devil temptation exists. We want to talk about, what is the devil? It's that creation of temptation. And I've seen that at state. And I've met people that's their professional class. And what I'm saying is this professional class exists. Just like people, took a while for people to understand before really I started the ball rolling on this. I know that, like Glenn Beck did an awesome whiteboard presentation on this stuff at one point, but I really made a campaign out of popularizing. This is like the one time I will cede maybe the use of the word campaign in a limited sense. I mean, it was me. It wasn't like a coordinated thing, but the popularization of the concept of a color revolution at home. Pre-summer 2020, that term had only been used in the context of benign, application of this technique to overthrow dictatorships abroad. 100 from I Am Dane. Wow. If on Fixer Beat, 1 month pre-regime collapse, Epstein and associate talk recovery of 80 billion Libyan yes, cash with taking finder's fees with MI. I saw that. Yes. Yeah. That's exactly right. I was actually, I made a note to myself to do a thing on that. And in fact, maybe I'll make a note to myself right now. And by the way, what is that doing? This is drafting this thing right here. This is drafting off of the activities of the people at the State Department, the Treasury Department, the War Department, and the Central Intelligence Agency. Which means there's probably going to be a fixer who talks to a high-level guy at the Department of War, because what we watched here was...
Yes, but who has IOUs to you? Is that who's out of the people in the past who you think you're close to? He said that he really wanted you to make this list of, this person owes me a favor, this person owes me his life.
This person owes me a favor. Now, he is not talking at this point to private sector Ehud Barak. Ehud Barak stepped down from Ministry of Defense, the head of Israel's military, entire military, the equivalent of our Secretary of War, the equivalent of our Pete Hegseth. He is still the Pete Hegseth of Israel at that point. He would not leave until a month later. Now, these groups profiteering off of regime change in Libya can only do that if the Pentagon chief, the Secretary of War, authorizes the invasion of Libya. If the CIA on the ground maximizes its covert support to that effect, if the State Department on the ground uses its diplomatic levers and foreign assistance funds, if USAID on the ground issues massive amounts of assistance funds to the NGOs supporting the rebels, and in doing so, they put a favor in the favor bank to the people trying to steal Libyan cash or get access to the new opportunity for Libyan oil. As United States policy is being made at every level of the United States government, every important government official has a run-in with a Jeffrey Epstein fixer to have the conversation about putting a favor in the favor bank. If you use your government power to run U.S. government policy this way, it will benefit some outside group who will return that favor to you with a fellowship, with a board seat, with a university center or institute role, with a book deal, with a you name it. And there is a devil on every high-level government official's shoulders in the United States that is always in their ear, tempting and saying, don't you want to be a good father, a good mother? Don't you want to be a good husband, a good wife? Haven't you always wanted to have a Rolex? Don't you deserve to be able to put your kids through private school? Look at what Jeremy has. Look at what Dan has. Don't you deserve something nice for once? And listen, Muammar Gaddafi probably is a son of a bitch. Look, I don't know if those, the atrocity porn, about him is right or wrong. It might be right. Well, if it is, if it's definitely right, well then, then this is the right thing to do. And I'll get the favor in the favor bank. And I'll get everything I've wanted with my career and my financial security. And even if you don't give in at first, it stays with you. And it's like a crick in your back. Why am I working so hard for so little? And you try to, it's not just that it changes what you do, it changes the way you think. Maybe Gaddafi really was committing all these human rights violations. I mean, we know he did this other fucked up shit. Do you understand? Do you think Eric Ciaramella quit the CIA cold turkey and then just applied like you do to colleges for the Carnegie Endowment? You think there were no talks in advance? You think there were no talks with the Soros Network or anybody around there? There were no talks with anybody else before he leaked it or throughout the process of him doing his testimony? Nobody said to him, listen, it's fucked up what they're doing to you. They're trying to tarnish your reputation. You're doing the right thing. What I want you to know is no matter what the Trump administration does to you, if they try to target you, that whatever they say about you in the press, you're safe. We got you. We promise that when you're done here, you've got a slot at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. It's run by our guys. Bill Burns is running it. So go Max. Go Max to Trump. Give it everything you got. Make sure he gets impeached. Make sure he gets imprisoned over this. Heck, we might even make you a senior director. We're going to really owe you. The country owes you, but we're going to owe you. And we'll repay that. You don't even need to say the last part. It's in the room. It's in the air. Everywhere. That's why I say there's a million Epsteins. That includes deal flow. When you've got, a huge fund that only takes billion-dollar clients, you get involved in deals just because you want pipeline access to the person who gives you the opportunities. So, all right. So that's that on that part of it. The other part, another criticism that I heard. So, okay. So Benz is covering for pedos. We covered that. Benz makes the Epstein files boring because it turned into a history lesson of things that happened 40 years ago. Well, that I guess we're about to get to. I'm just trying to compile the categories of things that I see that people just don't get yet with the concept album. But we'll do the stream on Europe tomorrow. Let me just take the time to focus on this now. Another major criticism that I heard was that I am whitewashing Israel, right? It's like we're in the MAGA civil war. So you have like intelligent Israel critics. You have like moderately intelligent, but not really in the news ones. And then you have like the NPC version of it, which is like you have people who want like a really simple answer for everything. That way they don't need to think about that much. They can, spend their time doing their job or playing video games or watching movies. And every once in a while they can check the news and feel like they understand how the world works. And because of the pervasiveness of the institutional connection between the U.S. and Israeli government at every level, statecraft, military, intelligence, and all the way down to the civil society institutions, education institutions, even medical institutions, all the way down. It is very easy to look at Israeli connections and even very deep Israeli connections as being solely and exclusively Israeli. And this also allows a kind of externalization so that you can kind of still feel really good about our country or not have to think about like complex joint intelligence or joint, operational things like the Safari Club, for example, we mentioned. U.S., Israel, Saudi Arabia, France, Morocco, pre-revolution Iran. It is hard to tell sometimes who the junior and senior rank is in any particular operation, initiative of statecraft. And I want to impress this on people. It is very obvious that the Israeli connections around Epstein are enormous. Everyone who's read past a fingertip beyond mainstream media reporting could see this well before these files dropped. You guys know, because we've done 100 hours of streams on it, how often I have talked about the cleanest link between Epstein and Israeli intelligence and military and statecraft, which is Ehud Barak. But because this goes back 40 friggin' years to, as we covered, the 1979 Iran Revolution, which was primarily a U.S.-Israeli joint foreign policy thing. Obviously, the Brits, the Saudis, they all had the interest there. The BCCI story, we covered, as I did on Joe Rogan, that this was literally a U.S.-Israel operation with a Saudi middleman. So I don't think that that is like leaving Israel out. You'd have to be kind of, I'm trying to be respectful and like charitable. We have to understand the comments are not. I am saying point blank period that Epstein was an American citizen involved in a U.S.-Israeli covert operation in 1979, 1980. And that he continued that network relationship for 40 years. And as I see comments that are like, oh, you're talking about stuff from 40 years ago, I'm saying, do you not appreciate like the magnitude of what I'm telling you right now? Now, so the thing that I regret not doing is talking about the Ehud Barak. And again, that was only because there were all these questions before that were completely unrelated. It wouldn't even made sense to insert it. The first question was about Pizzagate. The second question was about the JFK files. The third question was about, whether there are more than one Epstein. I had meant to get to the Ehud Barak side of this. Now understand, in my head, as you're doing this math, you're like, well, shit, I've done 300 interviews talking about Ehud Barak. I talked with Charlie Kirk on the Charlie Kirk show a month before he got shot about Ehud Barak and the Epstein-Ehud Barak connection. I talked about it with Patrick Bet-David. I talked about it with Liz Wheeler. I talked about it with Mario Knopfel. I talked about it with Julian Dory. I've done hundreds of hours of streams, and not just private streams. I clipped those and put them on my X and my YouTube. And Joe and I had talked about this like pre-taping, and I had this one flying around. So I thought, like, if I started with it, given that we were just talking about it and Joe knew about it, so it wouldn't really, and I figured you could look at this up all very easily. I thought I'd get to it once I'd gotten the core thing through about the CIA FOIAs that were actionable, the bill that was actionable. But I do realize that in context, I think that if I brought up, for example, that Ehud Barak was the head of military intelligence from 1983 to 1985, while Jeffrey Epstein was running the financial arm of the high-level individuals involved in Iran-Contra, that would have connected the dots in a more, like, people would have understood, I guess, me bringing that up. You know what I mean? And the fact that Ehud Barak was at Epstein's house like 47 times, and that they did business together in Cote d'Ivoire and Mongolia and Russia and the U.S. through Carbine 911. And then at that point, then say, and here's this audio tape I found just last night. And then use that to explain the favor bank. And that would have been the best way, I think, to answer that question about the million Epsteins. Because it is unavoidable when you look at these files. Like, for example, I had an open question before these files where it certainly looked like Epstein, like, for example, on the Saudi stuff, the Adnan Khashoggi, the Saudi passport and all that, there was an open question to me. It seemed more likely that Epstein was an American who got kind of, when he got recruited to Bear, he was like a, nice Jewish boy, so to speak, is, being set up with the boss's daughter. Not saying he was a nice, Jewish boy. But I don't know what he was like when he was 21, 23 years old. Point is at some point he got into this business at Bear and then got on an escalator that he never got off. And that escalator started through these Saudi finance networks that were juicing a U.S. Israeli, not just operation, entire foreign policy initiative. From Iran to Afghanistan to Pakistan, from there, the world. And I do think that if I could do it again, I would have pointed out some of the reveals that are new and that had been new by the time of our recording. Like, for example, Epstein says to someone, I forget who, that it's Israeli tech, but Arabs invest, with a winky smiley. And you look at that, you go, oh, okay, well, is that the way that he saw the things I thought that was the most likely case in the 1980s, that he had a Saudi passport and Saudi clients to advance a U.S. Israeli goal, but you didn't know where Saudi fell in the hierarchy, if that makes sense, on that particular operation with Epstein. Does that make sense? Because the Saudis can often throw around a lot more money than the Israelis. If you add up maybe the worldwide network, it's probably less, but Saudi Arabia is, let's see. GDP, Saudi Arabia. Okay, 1.32 trillion. Israel. Yeah. Saudi Arabia is twice as big an economy as Israel, and they have a centrally controlled sovereign wealth fund. Now, the math is obviously different because there's a much larger affinity network, I would argue, around Israeli statecraft and civil society institutions. But the fact is you don't necessarily know. If you look at George Bush, for example, George H.W. Bush probably got a lot more money through. There was a lot of joint U.S.-Israeli work, but the money really came from these joint oil deals with the Saudis. But you look at a receipt like that, you go, well, that would seem to indicate that Israel was the senior partner in these Epstein early financial transactions over the Saudis. And as for the and then there's the question, okay, well, who in any particular thing is the junior and senior? I mean, you talk to Israelis, they complain that America is the senior spot on many things, not all things. And that, there are a lot of Israelis who support cutting off aid to Israel because they feel like they're controlled by America. And I think the reality is that it depends on what the issue or initiative is. All the reporting is that the Netanyahu government is pressuring Trump to bomb Iran and has been for a year now. Trump came close, and I assume at some point the pressure will build and it will come to a real crux point, or it might not. But the fact is the Netanyahu government is not winning that fight right now. They're trying. If you look at what happened during the Obama administration, the Israeli government lost several fights, but in particular, they lost the Iran deal fight, despite pulling out all of the heavy artillery in the world to do it. And, in terms of, financial things like that, I mean, the U.S. has given more money to Ukraine in the past 3 years in aid than it's given to Israel in the past 30. I don't think we're a Ukraine-occupied government. Now, there are foreign policy decisions we've made in tandem and that disproportionately benefit Israel vis-a-vis something like Ukraine, like the invasion of Iraq. You could argue part of that was Libya as well. I'm sure there's a dozen or half a dozen. But it doesn't mean it is. You need to compile evidence to understand in any given situation what's going on, if that makes sense. And if you look at the people who think, okay, we have a completely Israel occupied government, right? Well, what were the worst abuses that we had? And again, this is not to downplay fucked up shit like speech codes on U.S. college campuses or support for wars that we shouldn't be involved in, or some of the lobbying stuff that is very unseemly and can definitely be extremely inappropriate or wrong, and maybe laws should be passed to reduce that. I would not be opposed to that. If your theory of the world is that Israel controls everything and Israel always wins, you need to contend with the fact that the only president of the United States who has ever been arrested, who has ever been put on trial, who has ever been convicted, was the most pro-Israel president in the history of the United States. If you believe that Israel controls everything and Israel always wins, you need to contend with the fact that the supporters of who at that point had been the most pro-Israel president were mass arrested mass put through lawfare, mass censored by the government that made a former Iranian intelligence guy the head of the National Security Council Intelligence Directorate. The head of a government that openly called for regime change in Israel pre-October 7th, when a lot of the politics on this shifted. Chuck Schumer openly called for regime change in Israel, said Netanyahu's illegitimate, and they were backing the Blue and White Party. And they were backing these Ehud Barak networks. And they were promoting, the Atlantic Council was promoting the corruption probes into Netanyahu. I don't know if they're true or not, but the fact is the Atlantic Council is who spearheaded the Iran deal. This is not to simp for the fucked up shit. I agree there's a lot of fucked up shit. But in a weird way, like if you believe that this is like a total puppet thing, how do you explain that? Then, like, you need to come up with a theory of the world that can explain what we experienced under the Biden administration if Israel was doing it. If anything, Israel was on the complete opposite side of that. Both in 2016 and in 2024. So do you know what I'm saying? But I feel in this MAGA Civil War period where there is I see the audience capture that happens with large content creators, where they know that there is this like loud comment section, and you see in your @ mentions, you know, massage show. And you have a choice to make about whether to like play to appease and, you know, like it'll drive engagement, or to like just talk honestly about the world as it is and hope to educate people while your reputation gets drugged through the mud. And so I thought, I mean, let's see, how many times did I, because I am responsive to, like I said, I do, my thought process was that we were going to get to the Ehud Barak thing. And then literally there was this moment. Let me pull the transcript. All right. So I mentioned Israel 19 times in this. And in particular, I went through the whole Bruce Rappaport, this whole thing, right? So so it's 43 minutes in.
Courtyard is sponsored by Bechtel. I think it's called the Bechtel Courtyard. But what happened is the Bechtel was promised by Iraq $1 billion contract in 1980, 80s money for constructing this pipeline. And the Central Intelligence Agency and the White House National Security Council, both for geostrategic reasons, wanted this pipeline built. The problem was they were afraid the Israeli government was going to sabotage the pipeline because Iraq was very hostile to Israel, and there was a lot of tension between the Iraqi government and the Israeli government, and they were afraid that if Bechtel got this contract and built this pipeline, that Israel would these pipelines are very fragile, and because it passes close to it, it's very possible that would happen. It would destroy both the CIA's goal and the private profiteer Bechtel's goal. So how do you solve that problem? Well, what the CIA did is what the National Security Council, which is the interagency that the CIA reports to, did is they engaged a private fixer named Bruce Rappaport, who was a Swiss billionaire with close ties to the Israeli government, to back channel with the Israeli government some sort of secret agreement that would guarantee that they would not sabotage the pipeline. And because the Attorney General of the United States, now, again, think about this as well. As I'm saying this, think about...
Well, I go on to, let's skip ahead a little bit, but basically, I connect this all that's to like the CIA protecting a dirty banker with close ties to the Israeli government so that it could secretly backchannel a financial deal with the Israeli government to dupe a U.S. government agency, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, which was to guarantee loans around the Bechtel deal. Now, that's an example where this is the CIA working with the Prime Minister's office. Now, the Mossad sits within the Prime Minister's office. It's a little bit different than our CIA White House relationship. And I'm giving a specific example in history that I'm damn sure that 99.999% of Rogan's audience has never heard before, to show the example of how these type fixers, including with those who leverage their strong links to Israel, like Epstein, do that contorts or that is done in tandem with shady U.S. government action. I thought that would help understand the Israeli contacts you see in the Epstein files, like in that light, and also answer the question, are there more Epsteins? And I'm like, yeah, we can go through a dozen of these. But it's like it's all over the head. So, and again, I do think that I should have talked about the Ehud Barak stuff because there's so much there. And there are reveals in the Epstein files. Here's the thing. So, as one of these things mentioned, Epstein does say, yeah, I've got my MI6 and Mossad guys on the Libya thing. Okay, but he's also got CIA guys. We have a letter, we have a email to Kathy Rumler, Obama's White House counsel turned lawyer for the Rothschild Bank, where he says, going to be meeting with Peter Thiel. Come to dinner and bring your spook friends. And she had just won the CIA agency medal. So I'm going to presume that means her CIA friends. So it's true. Epstein did say Mossad, but we know that. We've known that. We've known that's been the case since the late 1970s. And by the way, it's like more Amman than Mossad for what it's worth. Or at least the contacts are most clear with the Israeli military side than it is, in my view, with the Mossad guys. I think that's how you see all these weapons deals, not just from Iran-Contra, but all the way to present, which we saw in Mongolia and in Cote d'Ivoire. And even Carbine 911 is like, kind of military adjacent tech. But you do see other things that Epstein says, but you don't know how far to, like, for example, there's one point where Steve Bannon says all roads lead to Beijing. And Epstein replies, all roads lead to Tel Aviv, winky face. And that would seem to suggest, I don't know what the whole context of the thread is. I saw that in the Jmail thing that presents as an email. I need to read the whole. I need to find the DOJ file number and just see if there's any other context around that. I think the context was around Epstein talking about like investor stuff, like technological innovation and like companies to invest in that relate to, like Bannon was afraid that China would like control technological development. And I think there's a similar exchange, and it might be the same during the same exchange where Epstein says, well, you know, I've got all these tech companies. You know, we set them up, Arabs invest. So it sounds like, if that's the context of it, and again, I'll need to confirm by just reading again. It also sounds like that could be said not in the context of like, you know, I work solely and exclusively for the Israeli government and we control the world. Although there are things that he says that are close, although it's, you don't know how tongue-in-cheek it is. But in that case, he goes like, well, we're talking about what you should put your money into in tech firms. I have these tech firms. If you want to know like who's got the best tech, all like you think China controls the AI space because, you know, they've got the raw materials and, you know, to make this, you need raw minerals. And it's like 95% processing is in China. And so they really control AI because in order to run all these servers. And he's saying, well, actually, you know, Israel's the best companies, all roads to lead. So it's one of these things where it's like that kind of text message is really interesting. It's new. We didn't know that he talked like that. But you can read the tea leaves several ways. Like even when he doesn't think we're watching, he doesn't just say Mossad. He says Mossad MI6. You don't know every time who the junior and senior partner is on something. Now, I think the best way to understand Epstein is as a kind of cyanine, which is this sticky, gooey layer. Let me show you what I mean. So there's this, I was going to say great, but it's a very gory, it's a fascinating book for the first 100 pages. And then it gets pretty brutal. It's called Rise to Kill. And it's basically about the Israeli assassination program and apparatus. So like the first 100 pages, like, whoa, this is how Mossad is structured. This is how Amman is structured. This is like, you know, how all the intelligence organs of the Israeli government are set up and what they've done. And then it's like, okay, this assassination was this way, this one. And like you get to like the 300th assassination, you're like, okay, I've read a lot. And then you get to the next person, you're like, I really hope you really did that shit because like I know what's going to happen to you in the next 10 pages here. You know, anyway, but so this term cyanine, I'll just read the ChatGPT description. It says a Hebrew term commonly glossed as helpers or assistants. And so they're civilians who provide logistical help to Mossad operations. Okay. Logistical help. Okay. Things like arranging cars or air travel, for example. If you're running Southern Air, if you made a play for Pan Am in 1988, or if you got the CIA airline, and remember, Israel assisted with Iran-Contra in Nicaragua. They helped train the Contras. So if the Southern Air Transport, you can arrange logistics, provide temporary accommodation. Epstein owned a lot of properties. Helping with local knowledge, occasionally providing business cover or financial logistics. The key point in these descriptions is that the help is support logistics, not usually spying in the classic sense. Not handling people, recruiting agents, running sources. Now, they are not formerly Mossad officers, employees, or even informants. They are unpaid civilians who assist when asked, or sometimes don't assist if it's too rich for their blood or not this time. They're not formally employed. They're not formally double agents. They help when it helps them, where they want to put a favor in the favor bank so that Israeli contacts can owe them a favor. And in order to get another favor from Epstein, they'll do Epstein a favor on this one. This is the same type of thing it looks like he was doing with CIA, MI6, the Saudis, the French. Now, his network is disproportionately American Jewish diaspora with overlap with like the Ehud Barak network. But if Epstein was pure Mossad, I would actually expect to see a lot more emails with Israeli intelligence and military officials than I've currently seen. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, there's 10 people who are like, American intelligence or former intelligence in this email trove that I've seen. Are there 3 or 5 or 10? I mean, are there more than that on the Israeli side in the Epstein emails? I don't know. Maybe there are. I'd actually love to know that. But we have all his emails, including, ones with Ehud Barak, who was the head of Israeli military intelligence, the prime minister, and the, head of their Pentagon, basically. If it was pure Mossad, like, I would expect to actually see a lot more than I did. I'm happy to update that if folks can find it. But this is why I say, like, yes, there's a very deep thicket of Israel affinity networks in the U.S. and very clear touch points with high-level Israeli military and intelligence folks. That gives you a ballpark of things, but it does not mean you can explain this whole story as Mossad. And more than that, the files show Epstein struggling to get a meeting, even one meeting with Netanyahu. Which is like kind of the majority government and has been a huge force within. So you have this kind of political factionalism within Israel itself. Like, I think that I saw one that says, against all odds, we managed to get a meeting arranged with Netanyahu. And the against all odds suggests to me like they're not really in our network, doesn't really like us. And Netanyahu has been using the Epstein scandal as a political football against the more like Ehud Barak side of Israeli politics and their own apparatus. So do you see what I mean by the sticky middle layer? If you see Epstein more as Cyanim, it's not formally employed, connected but not formally employed. This is, I believe, the same, because what you have at heart is a fixer between worlds. It's the sticky middle layer. What is he? I think this is why he FOIA'd the CIA twice for records about himself. Because he didn't even know what he would be considered inside CIA. I've worked with you in the 1980s. I've worked with you in the 1990s. Now it's 1999. I'm about to become a public figure. Have you guys acknowledged that shit I did with you in BCCI? that shit I did with you in Iran, that shit I did with you in Afghanistan and Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. Remember when you guys got me that fake passport with a residence saying Saudi Arabia? But you told me that, you know, it would be issued through a contact you guys had, and it wouldn't be I would not be operating on behalf of the U.S. government. Just go talk to them, see what I can do. Did you disclose that anywhere? Did that technically count as CIA? I think that's why he FOIA'd the CIA. Again, I could be wrong. I'm glad the CIA FOIAs have been fired off to answer that question. But you have this. It's also possible that Epstein rotates to different government partners depending on who's in power, if that makes sense. For example, if the Trump CIA is blocking something at a high level, he goes more to the MI6 side of his contacts. If there's more money to be made, on the Israeli side of something, I think he's got a very special place in his heart for Israel. Don't get me wrong on this. It's obvious from his social contact, from the language he uses, and from how he started his career. Ace Greenberg sets nice Jewish boy Jeffrey Epstein up with his nice Jewish girl daughter. And the client that he gets investigated for doing hot deals on, that hot deal was for a company owned by Edgar Bronfman, who was the head of the World Jewish Congress, which acts as acted under his tenure, Bronfman's tenure, as a kind of shadow State Department for the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. What I'm saying is it's very dense. But if you don't understand the CIA side of it, first of all, you've got nothing to eat. You think you can FOIA the Israeli government? There's nothing actually, you can just point and sputter. Do you even know how to articulate, if you want, for example, transparency, what to even ask for? If you don't understand our own government's touch points? How can you even communicate to our own government or to voters in a subsequent government what our government should say if you don't know what our government's role in it was? And there was absolutely some role of our government. It might be the majority role. It might be a minority role. It might have evolved or pendulumed over time, over 40 years. So, all right. I think that's enough on that. And yeah, the fourth one didn't cover anything new. Well, yeah, I thought it was important to talk about little known data points like the BCCI, the pipeline, the Bruce Rappaport type stuff, because you're not going to read that in these files. So I thought that would be a place to teach it. Does that make sense? I know it's late. Chat's gone a little quiet. But all right, I think we hit the Europe thing tomorrow. We'll do another stream tomorrow night. Does that sound good?
Kiss me, mama, but you'll never control me.
All right. Good night. Godspeed. Thanks for being with me. I'll see you on the internet.